All right, today we're going to unravel a real historical head-scratcher. It all starts with what looks like a simple cottage on the English coast. But trust me, this story is anything but simple. We're talking family secrets, hidden money, and a trail that leads all the way from Regency England to colonial India. So, let's piece this thing together, shall we?
So, here it is. This is the heart of our story, Powys Cottage. Just look at it. Back in the early 1800s, this place was the absolute height of fashion. It's in Sidmouth, which was the place to be, a booming seaside resort where all the rich and famous flocked for the good weather and incredible views. It looks so peaceful, right? Almost like a postcard. But you know, looks can be deceiving. The real story of how this cottage came to be is, well, it's a lot more complicated.
And that, right there, is where our mystery really begins. You'd think the person who built this place would be some wealthy duchess or a big-shot local lord, right? Nope. It was a 42-year-old single woman, what they called a spinster back then, from Shrewsbury, a town almost 200 miles away. So the big question is, how in the world did she manage that?
Okay, so her name was Elizabeth Powys Floyd. And when you start looking into her finances, things get even weirder. The records show she had a pretty modest income. It mostly came from some shares in the East India Company. I mean, it was enough for her to get by, for sure, but build a fancy house in one of the most popular resorts in England? No way. The math just doesn't work. Something's missing here.
So to figure this out, we've got to put on our detective hats. And where does any good investigation start? You follow the money. Or in this case, you follow the paper trail.
And you know the first clue is a real curveball. The Floyd family story in Sidmouth doesn't even start at Powys Cottage. It starts here at number 7 Fortfield Terrace. And this is no quaint little cottage. This was a massive, super fancy townhouse. And guess who signed the lease back in 1795? Yep, Elizabeth Powys Floyd.
Okay, so this just makes the whole thing even more confusing. That lease was for £324. Now, for a single woman on a limited income back then, that's an absolutely astronomical amount of money. And it's not just the one-time payment, right? Think about the upkeep, the staff. You've got to pay for all that to maintain a place this big. So again, how is she possibly affording this?
And look, this isn't just a story or some kind of speculation. This right here, this is the actual lease document from 1795. This is the piece of paper that kicks off the whole mystery. You can even see her signature down at the bottom, Elizabeth Powys Floyd. Clear as day. So yeah, we know for a fact she signed it. The problem is, this document just opens up a whole new can of worms.
I mean, seriously, this one document just leads to so many questions. First off, how does a woman in Shrewsbury even find out about a new house being built 200 miles away? And why would she even need a home this big? Then there's the money, of course. How did she finance it all? But here's a really interesting one. Why would her live-in companion, Sarah Reynolds, risk everything, her job, her home, to go along with this crazy plan? Standing on its own, none of this adds up at all.
Okay, so if Elizabeth's story doesn't make sense on its own, it must mean there's someone else involved, right? A hidden player. And to find them, we have to look way beyond Sidmouth or even Shrewsbury.
The answer, it turns out, was 5,000 miles away, in India. Meet Elizabeth's older brother, General Sir John Floyd. Now, this guy was a big deal, a super successful, very powerful, and, most importantly, very wealthy army officer. He had the motive, he'd promised to take care of his sister, and he definitely had the cash. And suddenly, it all clicks into place. This wasn't Elizabeth's plan at all. It was her brother's.
So, here's how we think it all went down. In 1794, a friend of General Floyd's, Sir John Kennaway, comes back from India and buys an estate right near Sidmouth. He probably sees this brand new, fancy Fortfield Terrace being built and writes to Floyd back in India saying, hey, you gotta check this out. Floyd, who's already thinking about retirement, sees a golden opportunity. So he gets in touch with his sister Elizabeth and has her sign the lease for him. It's the perfect explanation. She wasn't the one with the money, she was just acting as his trusted agent from thousands of miles away.
Okay, so that explains the huge townhouse. Mystery solved on that front. But what about the cottage? Why go from leasing a giant house to building a brand new one from scratch? Well, that's the next piece of our puzzle.
And this is where the paper trail gets a little murky. You see, some local stories say that Elizabeth built another house first, a place called Whitby, but that just doesn't line up with the facts. We have personal letters from that exact time that prove she was actually in Kent taking care of her brother's kids after his wife tragically passed away.
You run into this all the time in history, conflicting stories that you have to sort through. But then, buried in the papers of a local historian, we find a breakthrough. A little handwritten note, and next to the property it says, Powys belonging to Sir John Floyd, Bart. Not Miss Floyd, Sir John Floyd, and that is huge. It's basically the smoking gun that tells us, just like with the townhouse, her brother was the one who owned the land all along.
So, once he had the land, Sir John hired a big-name London architect, a guy named Charles Augustus Busby, to design his dream retirement home. And what you're looking at here is the original plan from 1815. It's this beautiful, long, single-story building that was designed to just melt right into the landscape. Now, the style has a very fancy name, cottage ornée, which basically means ornamental cottage. It was super popular back then, during the Regency era. The whole idea was to get the best of both worlds, a house that looked kind of romantic and rustic on the outside, but on the inside, it had all the luxury and comfort a wealthy person would want. It was a total fashion statement. But if you look closely at the design, something stands out. Why a single story? That's kind of unusual for a fancy home at the time. And what's with those really wide covered verandas all along the front? There has to be a reason for that, right? Well, the answer is the last and maybe the coolest piece of this entire puzzle. Because that design, it's a direct copy of an Indian bungalow. In fact, the word itself comes from the Hindi word Bangla, which means belonging to Bengal. See, the British who lived out in India loved this style, a single story with those big, shady verandas, because it was just perfect for the hot weather. It kind of blended the indoors and outdoors together.
And that is the final key that unlocks everything. This design was never Elizabeth's idea. Think about it. A woman who'd spent her whole life in England wouldn't even think to build a house like this. No, this was Sir John's vision through and through. After spending 18 years in Bengal, he wanted to bring a piece of that life back with him. He was literally trying to recreate the comfortable, breezy bungalows he'd lived in, but on the English seaside. And just like that, the mystery is solved.
So, Elizabeth got to live in this amazing cottage for the rest of her days, and the last little bit of proof that this was always a family affair, a plan hatched by her brother, comes from her will.
When you read her will from 1827, it's really telling. She doesn't sell the cottage. She doesn't leave it to some random friend. She leaves Powys Cottage directly to her nephew, who just happens to be Sir John's son and heir. That's the final confirmation, right there. It was always meant to stay in the Floyd family. And you also see her kindness, leaving money for her nieces who live there with her, and even for her staff. It really paints a picture of the life they all shared in that house, the house her brother dreamed up from 5,000 miles away.
And I just want to leave you with this one last thought, which I think is pretty incredible. Powys Cottage was built to be a retirement home for Elizabeth Powys Floyd. And now, 200 years later, guess what it is? It's a retirement home for the people who live there today. It's just this perfect, beautiful loop in history, connecting this really complex family story from 2 centuries ago to the people living their lives in that very same building right now.